So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Phil Miller to talk today about cliff diving into the TSP, how Watts Humphrey saved a third-year software engineering lab course at the LNMIIT Information Technology. I'm not going to read Phil's whole bio. It's here. It's also on the Eventbrite notice. But Phil is currently a visiting professor of computer science and engineering at the LMN Institute of Information Technology in India. And prior to that, Phil had a very long career of over 30 years of really focusing on how to put the joy into developing software. You know, one of his early appointments was back in 1979 at Carnegie Mellon University, where he was responsible for all undergraduate programming, which led to an elaboration of the methodologies that they used at a company called iCarnegie, which was affiliated with Carnegie Mellon. Phil eventually became a TSP coach and has had the pleasure of coaching TSP teams. And I've had the honor of being able to work with Phil many times in the past. So it is my pleasure to introduce Phil and his students. So now I'm going to switch presentations.
And there it is. Okay, so that would be my cue to start, I think. So I'm Phil Miller, and we'll meet the co-presenters briefly. Next slide, please. And this was the first year that I was at the Institute, and my first real assignment, and just go ahead and hit the reveal, was a thing called integrated software development. I knew I had 210 students, no TAs, and I kind of wanted to know how they teach this thing. So next, hit it again. I'm a reveal it guy.
Okay, sorry.
You see, I'll let you. So I requested on how to do it. And eventually, like a few days before the course, I got a list of names of student projects. I said, if there's any chance this is not going to be a total disaster, I'm going to go back to my TSP days and see if we can't start using that. Next. No time to drink. I made 6 choices. First, use TSP methodology with teams. I met with each team 1 hour a week. Next. Use TSP launch materials as a primary reference. Next. Divide the 210 students into 21 project teams. Next, my epiphany was that I did not want to evaluate 21 different projects. I wanted people with skin in the game to do it. So I said, it's got to be open source, and they've got to work with you. Next. And then here's a real key. Take the best room on campus, especially when temperatures hit routinely well over 100, 110, 115. Make sure you get the one with the air conditioning. And oh, by the way, because I was bouncing between India and the US, make sure it's got good AV. And this is the room that, actually the best feature of the room is that it set up the kids to be in a professional situation where they were meeting like a professional development team. But no joke, get yourself a good room. Next. The final exam turned out to be post-mortem, except in one case was a checkpoint, and plus process dashboard held documents. Next. You know how to get ready for TSP. We didn't do any of that. It's just start clicking. So the litany of lacks is there. No TSP. Hang on for a sec. So planning, nah. Design, people openly ridiculed design to me. We don't do that here. Measurement, measure what? Estimation or quality. Those were all new. Those were new to the kids. Next. And of course, TSP and software engineering were not new. By the way, you may notice that I never told you with what the course was integrated. And that's because it wasn't integrated at all. But there was a concurrent, what's called software engineering theory course. And we really never got together and talked about software engineering. Next. Also, one of the unfortunate things is there were significant gaps in the people's programming education. There were, stuff was missing. Next slide. Next slide, please.
I'm trying.
Okay. So this is my evaluation of what happened. On the left-hand side is the team number. It goes to 21, so there are 2 of these. And on the top are, of course, the management roles that people got. And these were my evaluations of what they did. The TSP orthodoxy, of course, could not be there, lacking the kind of training that's needed. But what a 10 would mean, and the first couple of teams were just 10s across the board, means that, for example, the customer interface manager did indeed interface to the customer and did it in a professional way, getting the information that was needed and passing it back, and so on and so forth. Reading down the right-hand side are who are the customers. So Audacity, among other things, the reason that it spoke to me was that I'd been using it for years, probably for a decade. It turned out that it was started and is still godfathered by a friend and colleague, Roger Dannenberg. And when I said, hey, do you have any good projects to do? Turns out they were riddled with defects because they don't know you guys. And there were lots of projects from which people could choose. But, Jupyter Notebooks, I got a lesson in what's going on in the world these days. Jupyter Notebooks, which is the substrate for a whole bunch of the machine learning stuff. Stop stock is not what you think it is. But Microsoft Visual Studios, yeah, that really is Microsoft Visual Studios. Found out coding blocks is kind of like the programming environments I was doing in the 80s. Let's bump to the next one. And I do want to say a couple things about these. I'd have to go to the details to tell you much about many of them, but I'll tell you about 2. The last 3 as a group were the people known as the losers, and that was their self-designation. So what I did in organizing the teams is, okay, organize yourselves in teams. And 180 kids did that. And 30 kids said, nobody wants to work with me because I'm a loser. So I divided it up to 3 teams of losers, 10 each. And I'm happy to say that 2 of those 3 teams not only did their projects, they all did their projects. 2 of the 3 teams did them so well that when they made a pull request on GitHub, it was honored and their code was merged in. And so team 19 in particular, they had made a secret pact to pretend to do TSP and somehow hack their way through the project. About 6-7 weeks into the semester, they hated each other. They were yelling at each other in meetings, and they had an act of utter desperation. They had really nothing to do with it. They decided to use TSP, and they said it was like, doors opening, things started working correctly. And all they were doing were using really the documents that you give to a new person new to TSP, and a minor bit of coaching from me. I had them an hour a week. When they rolled into the post-mortem, having had their code merged, it was night and day. It was great. I will mention that the team 16 there, Open Zeppelin, it was 5 blockchain wackos and 5 people who basically opted out of college. But I guess familial pressure keeps you there. It turns out they too became contributing members of the project. Turned out to be perhaps the most splendid experience of my academic career as a teacher. And so rather than have me gab about stuff, let's get into the details of what went on in some of the teams. And I think you might actually recognize TSP when we get there. The next slide we'll hand off to Aditi.
Hi everyone, so my name is Aditi. I'll just give you a little introduction about myself. So I'm currently in the pre-final year at LNMIIT and I'm pursuing computer science. So I have been working with Coach since the first day 1 as it is. So he was just doing a C programming course and he was teaching students. So actually I should have learned proper programming by the very first year. But turns out it wasn't up to the mark. So I enrolled in his course, and then the next semester also I was in his other course, which was ISD, which we are talking about. Then currently he is again doing the C programming course for the first years, and I am the teaching assistant in that course, which I'm delighted about. Moving on to the next point about me is that I was in the list which featured 100 and 105 most brightest engineers of India, which was a list by Economic Times. It was done from a pool of about 49 engineers from over 2,000 colleges, which I'm, again, happy about. And then I am also a finalist of Smart India Hackathon, which final will be in the next month. So let's see how that goes. Moving on to the next slide. Let's talk about Audacity. So for this, I would like you to move forward and click on a link which is present on the slide. Yeah, you have to. Yeah, there's a link.
Heels. Okay.
Yeah.
Bring it over. Hang on. Okay.
Yeah. So moving on to the next slide, I'll talk about what Audacity actually is. It is a very simple software which you can use as an audio editor and a recorder for a lot of operating systems. So this was an open source software, and the people from Audacity contacted a professor, and then through him we got this project. So what they really wanted us to do was to change the format by which the projects are stored. So currently they are stored in file manner, and they wanted to convert it into an SQLite database. So that is the gist of what we did. Moving on to the next slide. Right. So this project was a really big project. The number that you see on your screen, these were the lines of code that we had. So it was a really big number, and we were just out of second year, and we had no idea how to deal with such a big code. Moving on, let's see how we tackled this. Moving on to the next slide. This is just a format which shows what the requirements were. Moving on to the next slide. Right. So what we did was we divided what we could do in this 2 to 3 months of time. So what we came out was phases that we first need to get an acquaintance over SQLite, then we need to see what we could design, and then we need to test it. That we had to do was to figure out what this code is all about. A very big mistake that our designer friend did was that he just dived in and he looked at what the code is and everything, and of course he could not figure it out. So after 3 days he comes to us in the meeting and he's like, I don't know what to do. So at that time, coach rightly pointed out that this is not how you deal with things. He told us about this GNU debugger, and so then after this we could get a better hold of what the design was. Moving on to the next slide. Right. Also, it was quite unfair for that design manager. It was not possible for him alone to do this. So we added one more design manager, and they could actually figure out what was wrong. To the next slide, please. Right. So this is basically what they came up with, how they'll store everything into the database. This is basically a block diagram of that. Moving on to the next slide. These were the block files that we had, and we knew that we do not need to know everything about this. We were only concerned with the first one, which is simple block file and blob file. Moving on to the next slide. Yeah, so this was what they came up with. It was a data structure, what they wanted to do at the end of the day. Moving on to the next slide. So this was the functional specification template for what the Audacity already had in place. Now we need to change this thing to what I am talking about, right? So now we also have the logic specifications and functional templates in the slides that are coming up, but I won't discuss about this in much detail. Yeah, let's skim through it. So it was basically just how we need to approach it, and I have already covered that. Yeah, so this was the logic specifications, and we also had to the next slide, please.
Keep going.
Yeah. Okay. So this was just the context of how big our project was and what we wanted to do. Now moving on to what my role was in this, I was the quality manager of ISD Team 1. Moving on to the next slide, please. Right, so this is one thing that I figured out, and it was really important. You know? So you think that, okay, you are putting in 1 week or so of time into quality, and you think that you will be wasting your time. Gone with the first design template that we had, it would have been a total disaster. We would have missed so many things. So eventually what actually happened, which is surprising, was that it took us 3 inspections to get to the design that we actually did, which was working. So it's really surprising, you know. We thought that, okay, we'll just give it at most 1 week, but ultimately we had to give it 2 to 3 weeks, which was a very good decision at the end. So yeah, moving on to the next slide, please. This is just simply states what the major defects and what minor defects are. Moving on to the next slide. These are some of the snippets that we had of the defect log. Moving on to the next slide. Thank you. This is, we asked them to do the TSP scripts so they could do a review of their work and see whether they had done something or not. Moving on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is, I figured out this was the most important form that we have in quality, which is INS form. So this form right here has how many defects, what are the major defects, what are the minor defects everyone found. There is a list of approximately 9 defects that we had. We also found out this form is just after the second inspection that we did. So ultimately we found out that we have more than 9 defects, which is 11. So there's all of great details into what is in it, but let's skip it through. Yeah, so what actually happened was that in the INS form, there's written that if there are more people who find unique defects, then you need to fill the form twice and you need to do these calculations again, and you take the higher number. So that's what we did. There were 2 inspectors who found the unique defects, which were the same number. So we did fill out 2 forms and we found out the high number and took it with us. Moving on to the next slide, please. Yes, so these are this is the yield that we got, which was pretty good. So after this yield, but after this yield, we knew that, okay, we need to now move on to the next phase. Moving on to the next slide, please. Yes, so quality is never an accident. It is always the result of intelligent effort. This is something that I take to my heart, and this is something that I've learned from this course. It was amazing. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Yeah, so this is the test that we did when we knew that, okay, this is the design that we need to carry forward. So this is the just a glimpse of what the speed analysis and what we got out of the end at the end. It's just not, we are not blabbering, we actually did work and we have the results right here. So if you would move on. Yeah, so the first test was what was the current system that they have, and the type 2 test was what we did, what we proposed to do. Moving on. Right, so this was the test environment, 64-bit Linux machine and Intel i7 processor. Let's move on. Yeah, so these are just the numbers that we found out. I have a summary that I think we should go to the summary, otherwise I'll eat up a lot of time of Aayush, and I don't want to do that. So let's move on. Yeah, so these were the data that we had. So at the end, we have the result at the very last slide, which has, yeah. So this is what we actually had at the end of our semester, which is we could read this much times faster and update 5.12x fast times faster, which is great. So it was a really amazing course for me, and as well as for my teammates, it was amazing. But I would like Aayush to share his insights now. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi. Can we have a look at the previous PowerPoint?
Yeah. Whoops.
Oh, yeah. Right. So hello and namaste. My name is Aayush Mishra, and I'm currently a pre-final year student at the LNMIIT. I am pursuing a Bachelor's of Technology in Computer Science, and I'll talk briefly about a few of my achievements. So I was selected amongst the top 20 people globally to receive a scholarship for the Harvard Project for Asian International Relations 2019 at the Harvard University. I was amongst the top 10 people globally to receive a scholarship to attend the International Development Youth Forum in Tokyo in 2019. And in my first year of my college, I was the campaign lead of Facebook's Voice Plus Challenge, and our team came amongst the top 10 teams in India. And we were invited to a national conference in New Delhi. And I love reading fiction. I sometimes write as well. And my most notable work is the Story Mirror contest, in which I won the fiction writing contest. You can find my publication in the ebook 21 Dimensions. And I'm seriously passionate about environment, biodiversity, conservation, and animal welfare. Any opportunity I get to work on these issues, I dedicate my time. Yeah. So coming to the next slide. Yeah, you can present the whole thing, the whole slide.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, you can skip forward. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's everything. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Fine. So I was the team lead and the substitute planning manager for ISD 08 team. And we picked out Audacity's bug 2125, which is a priority level 3 bug. And there are actually 6 priorities of bugs in Audacity, with priority 0 being the most difficult and the most urgent bug, while priority 5 being the most easy and the least urgent. And we picked out priority 3 because we thought that we would do it. But as soon as we started looking at the code and started looking at what we've gotten ourselves into, we realized that this is out of our scope. I mean, this is way too difficult for a bunch of third-year students who are not experienced programmers to solve this kind of thing. The reason being that there were 1 million lines of code, and we did not even know where the bug was located. So, and we had no idea about the software of Audacity, how it works, and what the code base is like. So it was a challenge, but I would say that with teamwork, collaboration, and individual responsibility, while following TSP, we achieved a miracle because we religiously followed TSP. We were not getting any results initially, and we did not think that we'd get results later on as well. But we did not only end up finding where the bug was, but also end up solving it. And while we found the bug, we realized that it's just, among a million lines of code, it's just one single line that's causing this issue. And we had to just fix a few characters and some values, and we solved the bug. So without TSP, it would have been chaotic, and we would have unequal contribution of the 10 team members, and we would not have reached to a conclusion. But with TSP, everybody knew what they had to do and when they had to do it and how they had to do it. And everybody had a significant contribution and same equal contribution, and we did achieve success in the end. So I'll talk a little bit about the bug. If you just, I think, forward it once more, you'll get a video link. Yeah, so you can click on the video link, and before you watch the video, I'll just tell you a little bit about what the bug was. So basically, when you zoom out on the audio tracks, the sound clips in Audacity, what happens is that after one particular instance, it becomes invisible when you zoom out enough. So that used to cause a lot of problems, as when you're working on huge projects, you will have to, you can just have unnecessary noise and you will not be able to find it, and many other significant such issues. So you can play the video and you can see what we did. Oh, I don't think anybody is able to hear this. So, all right, I'll just voice over this thing. So, what we basically just showed was that a clip just went invisible, and it's not visible to the normal user, but when you hover over it, you can see that there's something over it. And when you drag the clips from the left to the right position or otherwise, you'll see some hindrance. And the solution to this bug we proposed and achieved was that we fixed the minimum pixel length of this track to 1 pixel. So that initially it was 0, so it just went invisible, but now that we fixed it to 1, it always remained visible irrespective of how much you zoom out. That was a minor bug, and the code was huge, and we never thought we could achieve it, but by the end we achieved the results. And I guess all thanks to TSP, and yeah.
I think I can play it.
Yeah,
I just have the microphone muted, so let me try playing it again.
Sure.
Since the clip is invisible, it is impossible to drag it, which is quite obvious as we can see. The second issue can be observed when we're attempting to drag a visible clip by using the time shift tool. The clip doesn't move at all for no apparent reason, and a black merged line can also be noticed. Our solution implements the prescribed suggestion to set the minimum clip width to 1 pixel, regardless of the extent of zoom. Now, the audio clip does not disappear on zooming out, as you can see.
So this is actually a short snippet of the actual video. The actual video is posted on YouTube. It's called Audacity's Bug 2125 Fix. It's a 3-minute, 50-second long video. If anybody is more interested about this, you can have a look. So that was my part. Handing over to Professor Miller.
Oh yeah, I sort of forgot that I come back at some point, and this is that point. So a bunch of things really worked. What a genius! I mean, everything's there. If you want to know what you're going to do, 3 weeks from now at 2 o'clock, you just look, you just look at the work breakdown structure, and you know the plan. And his detail just really came through for us, and I realized that a number of the people who are on this video helped make that real. So thank you for your help, really appreciate it. Teams was great. Roles worked out really well. Weekly meetings worked out really well. Open source projects was a thing of genius. And the post-mortem turned out to be a very good way to wrap up the projects. Parenthetically, Aditi's team, Team 1, did a checkpoint at that point because what they had achieved was they got their design, they got the defects out, and they did their test on the proposed technology, which, if ever implemented, will in fact gain Audacity more than an order of magnitude in messing with its files. And actually, currently, people losing their files is a big issue with Audacity. Next slide, please. Things that sort of worked. The launch process, it took me weeks to do that because it took me weeks to do that. Quality, and what I want to say is it sort of worked, not in the sense that it sort of worked, like when you actually did it, like Aditi and Team 1 did it, it worked splendidly. It did just exactly what it wanted. Those folks achieved metrics and you used the process to find out that they had to keep looking for defects because et cetera, et cetera. You know, it just worked like it was supposed to. But for many people, not so much. The open source projects, which I said really worked, they also really didn't work because many of the people who are on those projects aren't ready for the help that they're soliciting. And so some good experiences, some bad experiences, some customer interface managers could not get what they needed back from the host projects. So it went both ways. Need to be more careful. And TSP only sort of worked because we only sort of got to understand it. That's a reality. Now let's get to the things that were a disaster. I was. So one thing that you really need to give a team is detailed feedback. That's one of the things I really liked as a coach with TSP. I had all the data. I could tell people exactly where they were. They could actually tell me exactly where they were. I mean, when it's working right, you mostly watch. And well, I achieved the mostly watch part, but it really would have been better if I could have given more detailed feedback to the teams. There were a couple things working against that, and one was process dashboard, which was implemented for everybody, but implemented poorly enough that it was much or largely unused. So that was a real disaster, and ultimately that's on me. Communication and collaboration with my colleagues. So it turns out I am the only visiting professor at LNMIIT. I am not the only professor at LNMIIT. And it would have been nice if I had gotten them on board. I mentioned there were no TAs. About halfway through the course, I was assigned a new hire professor who ended up being completely unable to help since he went home at 6 p.m. And that's when we got started. So that was kind of a mess. Let's see what's on the next slide. I actually forget. Oh, yeah, this one goes slowly. Okay, so what am I up to? I mean, why am I hanging out in Rajasthan? It wasn't so I could do a course. Next. Or a university, although the course was, as I've said, a wonderfully fulfilling event in my life. And I hope to make a dent in the university's curriculum teaching and especially testing. But what I'm really, what I have my sights set on is the next click, which is the interface between the academy and the people who hire the people trained therein. And I will just say that being an eyewitness to the recruiting and hiring practices in India was a wretched experience. You cannot imagine what the two people here with us today and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands go through when they're looking for a job. It's one exam after another by these companies, and just the companies don't know what they're doing in exams. It's really trivial pursuit for the IT professional, and somehow these people manage to maintain their focus on my class as well as the hiring practice. I want to fix that. There's a lot of things wrong with it. I won't go into them now. So hit the next button, please, because I'll never remember what I was saying. Oh, I want something from you guys. hit it again. And here's what it is. First, TSP, great thing. Still use it today. You know, the results that Aayush got, his team, the results that Aditi got, great. And that's basically the story, top to bottom. But you know, for the mere fact that there's a modern tools team or modern tech team, that its day is gone. I need a complete and modern package for building software, not as complete as Watts would do. You know, maybe one order of magnitude less. But I'd like to get the, okay, hit the next. I need a battle-tested minimum viable methodology and tool set. That's what I really need to do a good job of what I do. Mind you, it's not doing a good job in the classroom at LNMIIT that I have in mind. It is promulgating methods of teaching, tools of teaching, methods of software development, so that this course can really shine. Next, there's not much more to my homily. It'll be okay. You should think of what I'm asking from you as a foundation that you would love for your incoming young engineers. You know, I don't need a million options. Sure, pros do. I need a path that's good, a path that's solid, a path that's going to prepare people for the kinds of things they'll see in their own work. But I do not want to abandon the measurement, the estimation, that sort of thing that TSP gives you. I need your best, and so does everybody else. And oh, by the way, I need it now, and if it works, last point, I'll be back and ask for more. So that's it from me. Thank you so much. Hit it one more time, because I have a lovely slide where you can figure out how to get in touch with the talent and also with me. Questions?
May I have a question? It's Fernando Jaimes. I feel where it was not clear to me, where did the students get the information on the TSP methodology, the essence of it, and how much of the technical aspects of programming they knew as a background, they had as a background. Thank you.
Well, I think we ought to ask the students where they learned about TSP, because 1 hour a week with people, what can you do? And oh, by the way, the plane is taking off even as they're doing it. So, Aayush, how'd you learn about TSP?
Yes. So, Coach, you shared some materials with us before the beginning of the course. So there was that, and we had formal meetings every week for 1 hour. So we learned a lot during that time, and also we had informal meetings amongst ourselves. We were a group of 10 people, so we used to get into a reading room or a TV room and collaborate and discuss what is our understanding of the role of a process manager, what's our understanding of the role of a quality manager. And we just discussed and had debates, and we just come to a conclusion, and we'd get an understanding of what TSP is from our side. And then later on that week, Coach would be there to help us out, and if we missed out on anything, or if there's anything extra additional that's required that we do not know. So there's all sorts of things. There was materials, there was discussions amongst ourselves, there was discussion with Coach. So eventually, and since we were formally practicing it, I think we eventually got the hang of it.
So I want to butt in here. Although we skipped all the stuff you're supposed to do because the course starts today, and I want to use TSP because anything else would be disaster. One thing I know about teaching is that it works best when the students become your partners in their education. And what Aayush just described was how he led his team into partnership with me, and now hopping over to Aditi, and I'll say one thing that she did. Obviously, she learned how to do the quality stuff, and she got people to line up and do it properly. But one of the things she did is she organized all the quality managers. So that, again, that's students becoming participants in their own education. And it is so different from, we used to say, going from the sage on the stage to the guide at the side. Well, I really believe in that. And while I would have been delighted to do things properly, because every bit of the PSP, TSP experience was fulfilling, this is the amount of time we had, this is what we did. Aditi, any remarks on that?
Yeah, I would just like to say that all of the quality managers, so when we had to start the quality work, so before that, all of us, one of them would ask some doubt of what this exactly means, like what part of the INS form is this or what is that. So we would collaborate once in a while, and we also held 1 or 2 meetings with you while you were away from college. So yeah, exactly like Aayush said, we would discuss amongst ourselves and we would take help from coach. Yeah.
Right, and as far as the gaps in programming, the big thing I noticed is when I said, hey, why don't you use the debugger, look at the call stack and see what's doing what. They were unfamiliar with that jargon. They were aware of the call stack from recursion, but that was an isolated instance rather than a whole. And okay, that's that. So if we didn't answer your question, please pretend that we did, so somebody else can ask something too.
Thank you. They did.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I'm going to jump in with a question. Thank you, Philip, DT, and Aayush. Boy, I'm going to just go to the top of the stack. Aditi showed a slide earlier, and I'm quite impressed that you showed a capture recapture result indicating the number of defects left after an inspection. And I'm impressed with it because it's obviously part of the TSP, but a lot of teams don't make use of it or don't even calculate it. And so I'm just curious, did you or did anyone on the team ever make use of that number? In other words, did anybody decide to re-inspect or to do something differently if that number was high?
Yeah. So there is an instruction in the INS form that professor gave us. So there was the number, it was, I am forgetting what exactly it was. So it was like if A minus B is 4, and if it's greater than it, I am exactly forgetting what it was. But through that, we could figure out that, okay, we need another inspection because this is clearly not the best thing. So yeah.
And so as a follow-up, you mentioned that that INS form was powerful or valuable.
Yes.
Could you say a little bit more about why it was valuable? Why you discovered it was valuable?
Yeah. So what we had this defect form, we had the reviewers checklist. So there was some Q form as well. So some Q was basically like, what is your prediction and what is the actual result. So below every form there was the expected. There was expected what you are. If you are below this number, then you need to inspect it again. So I think that was the form which helped us to decide whether we need to go on with another inspection phase or if we can move on with the current design. So that's why I said that INS form was the most important form that we had.
Okay. And so, yeah, so I guess, yeah. So you followed it. That's
I'll interrupt here, David. It's just like a diet. If you follow them, they actually work. So
Right, but as you know, 99% of people don't follow diets.
well, yeah, I want to make it sort of another meta point on teaching. I know there are a lot of bright kids at LNMIIT. It's not the top of the heap as universities go. Obviously, these two have tremendous personal achievements, although I didn't know about them until they wrote them down. But trusting your students, I mean, yeah, sometimes treating people like adults and then just being around to remind them and being available to help them, that can go an awfully long way. And I guess in addition to what's my students saved me, but they really did. Even the students who thought they were losers saved me. It was just a great course.
Yeah. Well, kudos on the way it was structured. That's really the acid test that a pull request is was agreed to. Yeah, so great outcome.